So, what did you think about the Navy commander's views on motivation? Very motivational, I think, right for the audience, appropriate for the situation, the task, and the people he was speaking to. Some key messages in there about motivation, making a difference, and the fact that key small things can make a difference, just like he was saying about making the bed. But we said before the video we'd look at some other more recognized theories of motivation. And the first one is quite an old one, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow, 1943, A Theory of Human Motivation, looking at the general motivation for life, but can be adapted into many situations. We'll talk about that in a moment. So he started off by talking about the physiological needs, the cornerstone, breath, food, water, sleep, all the things we need to live. He then moved on to the next layer, talking about safety, feeling secure in our home, with our family, feeling our property was secure, our resources were secure. He then went on to love and belonging, wanting to be part of a family or group, having friends. Moved on to how that helps to build our self-esteem, confidence and respect, and saying that we reach self-actualization when we've got acceptance, satisfaction, and we feel we've got achievement. And these are all things, and they sort of build in blocks as they move up. And if you remove something from the bottom, it can all start to fall down. Just like if we started talking about a member of staff who's got problems with health or is struggling with sleep, that would be one of those base ones, physiological ones, that could cause the performance or their motivation to drop. But I think we need to sort of bring it up to date and make it more focused on the workplace. And I think we can do that by thinking about it as an applied to employee engagement. So Maslow was talking about it, motivation for life, and we can sort of, as I said, it's molded into a lot of things, but we can use that on a basis of talking about employee engagement. And at that base level that Maslow stage 1 talked about, psychological, we can be talking about in the workplace, have we got the right basic facilities for them? Because if they haven't, they're going to disengage and they're going to go into survival mode. So, have they got good facilities? Is it nice and warm at work? Is it clean? Is there tea and coffee? Is there someone for them to have a break? And those sort of things, if we ensure those basics are there, then we can start to get those people to sort of engage. And the second stage, when they're not really engaged, but they're worried about their security, Maslow was talking about safety, and staff need to feel secure. And I know we can't always make them feel secure in their job secure, but it can go further than that. It can be about, as we talked about before, British values. Do they feel that they're secure in that there's democracy in place, that people believe in the rule of law, that there is tolerance and respect, and that they are going to have their individual liberty respected? Because at that stage we can start to create a sense of community, build relationships, and that employer-employee relationship will start to make them feel secure with, say, one-to-one meetings, team meetings, feeling that they've got a voice. And that'll lead stage 3, a love and belonging, as Maslow talked about. But at this stage, we've got our employees sort of engaged. They're almost feeling they belong in the workplace. We now need to show them that they matter. That they matter to us, that they matter to the organisation, a chance to get involved, to share ideas, to start to let them feel empowered. Moving on to stage 4, when Maslow talked about esteem, this is where we're now saying we've got these people engaged, we need to make them realise how important they are to us now, and create a good community feeling in the workplace, a sense of purpose, a sense of well-being. And this is when we might be starting to talk about out-of-work activities, and getting them involved. And the final one, satisfaction, because we don't just want engaged employees, we want highly motivated, highly engaged employees. We've got them engaged. Now we're talking about getting them involved in new ideas, actually taking control, trying to shape the workplace and the workforce, inspiring other people, and that takes leadership. And we've talked before about behaviours and showing actions that back these things up. And at this point, the leadership that they're shown is really, really important to continue their motivation and keep them motivated. So the next theory we'll look at is Herzberg two-factor theory, or as it's sometimes known, hygiene theory, and sometimes known as dual factor theory. But basically it works on the principle that there are factors such as hygiene factors, things such as terms, conditions, policy, and then there are motivational things such as chances for achievement, growth, responsibility, and they equal results, results being a motivated employee. But we can look at these around, specifically around job things, and we can see around the job, the sort of factors that we're talking about in the hygiene would be things that are actually surround the job rather than the job itself. For example, a worker will only turn up for business if it's provided a reasonable level of pay, safe working conditions, but those factors won't make him work harder. So those British value things make him feel valued. So he might think that the rule of law, because he's protected, the fact that he's treated as an individual, but they won't make the person necessarily work harder. The bits that will make them work harder are the things about making an interesting job, giving them a challenge, some responsibilities, something supportive, an opportunity to extend themselves, and recognition of that. And that will give us a result of a satisfied and motivated member of staff. But again, those things will all have a different balance for different people, and what motivates one may not motivate the other, and we'll talk about that more as we look through some more of the theories. As in both those theories we talked about, particularly in the last one, it's about getting the balance right. It's about a balance between the demotivating factors, poor conditions, restrictive policies, continual pressure, an oppressive atmosphere, and people feeling they don't belong, balanced against those varied interests. Now, some of those things in the top half, there is going to be pressure possibly because it's part of the job, but if we're making it a challenging role and then we're offering support to go with that, it can help to balance those things out. Next, we'll look at Vroom's expectancy theory based on employees' beliefs and values, and we've talked about them. They could be British values, they could be their previous experiences, etc. But Vroom stated there were three factors that interact together to create a force that provides that motivation. The employee works towards that pleasure of the motivation by avoiding any pain. He said there were three factors to consider: the valiance, which refers to the emotional orientations of that person, whether they respect the outcome or the reward that's at the end. What sort of value do you attach to what you're going to achieve? The second was the expectancy. He talked about the different expectations due to levels of confidence, what people believe their effort will be worth in order to get an outcome. And then the instrumentality, he referred to the perception of the employees as to whether they actually believe that they'll get what they desire. Do they believe what the managers promised them? I think we can explain it simpler than that by looking at the picture, though. We can start talking about it's about the effort put in, and does that provide the performance that you'd expect for the effort you've put in? And then after you've put that effort in and achieved that performance, will that performance get you your desired outcome? And the theory says that if it is all worth it, then you'll be motivated. But it's complex. It's complex. You know, some people will think, I can't be bothered to put that level of effort in to achieve that level of performance at the first outcome, that sort of performance level. Other people might think, well, even if I do and I achieve that level of performance, what I'm being offered, the second outcome, isn't really something that I want, and therefore the motivation is not achieved. So again, it's about finding out what people are prepared to put in, what they think it's worth achieving, and trying to work out from that what level or how you manage them and how you deal with that situation. So the next one we're looking at is Wiener's three-dimensional, and that's an attribution theory. And attribution theories are based on how much meaning we attach to our own behaviour and other people's behaviour. Wiener was looking at three areas. He was talking about your ability, effort, and the task difficulty. And he also said that luck was a factor that come in there as well. But he was talking about, and all attribution theories talk about or base on the fact that we've got to try and determine why people do what they do, and then attribute a behaviour to that feeling. For example, if a student fails a maths exam, they could believe they failed it for a number of reasons. One could be that they didn't revise enough, they didn't try hard enough, or it could be that they believe that they're just rubbish at maths and they can't do maths. Or they may believe that they've had poor teaching and they haven't been readied for the exam properly. Now, whichever one they believe can have a massive impact on their future behaviour, and if they'll bother to have a go at another or try to get another maths exam completed. For example, if they believe they're rubbish at maths, then they may just say, I can't do it. If they believe it's because the teacher was poor or they weren't prepared for the exam properly, then they may be prepared to have another go with someone else. So it can be different depending on the person and how they feel about those things. So in Wiener's theory, he identified 3 clear factors: locus of control, controllability, and stability. We'll start with stability. He was talking about how stable was the attribution. For example, how much does the employee believe that it's their fault? For example, they didn't meet a target because they weren't good enough, or they couldn't complete a task to the required level because they weren't good enough. Or is it an unstable factor, such as they had a bad week or something went wrong on that day that they can put it down to, which is less permanent? He observed from that stable attribution. So, for example, if it was an exam, if someone passes an exam and gets a really good result, they'll have higher motivation and think that they can pass exams in the future. However, if they fail an exam because they think it's that they weren't good enough, a stable attribute, then they're probably less likely and their expectation becomes lower, and they start to feel that they aren't going to achieve in those sorts of situations. And that can seriously affect people's motivation if that's been their experience in the past. He also said locus of control was about whether the event was caused by an internal or an external factor. So did they, like I said, can they control it? So if it was that they weren't good enough, could they improve? They've got a chance to control that. Whereas if it's an external factor, such as equipment failure or something, they may feel not as demotivated by the fact they failed, because they know that next time the equipment may not fail, that next time things might be more successful. And the controllability, he talked about how much controllability was there in the situation. Does the individual believe they could have performed better? Do they believe that if there's something they changed they could do, or do they believe that it failed and they've got no control over changing those things, and that's the way it's always going to be? And taking these 3 sort of factors into account can have an impact on how motivated someone is, perhaps to try something again or to try something new, for example, when you're working with them. And I think we need to be aware of these things and try and look at individuals and see where their motivation may be being affected by these factors. And I think that's what he was trying to look at. So we'll move on to the next one. So another theory, Alderfer's ERG theory, is based on people's circumstances, and he said there were 3 factors: existence, relatedness, and growth, hence the ERG. And people's requirements or motivation will vary depending on that. So the person who hasn't eaten for a while, their top desire is going to be they want food. The person who's isolated is going to want to communicate, and people's different situations will produce different motivational factors. The theory is meant to cover all types of motivation, but we'll look at it from an relationship to managing your team. So the existence will be about physical security and material desires, things that are needed, as Maslow talked about in his first steps: air, water, food, safety. And in the workplace, that'll be based around conditions, safety equipment, if it's cold and decrepit. Then the relatedness was about social esteem, belonging, and interpersonal security, so related to part 2 and 3 of Maslow's, where he talked about safety, love, and belonging. When it's talking about an employee, it's about making sure they've got a good relationship with their co-workers and their employers, and that they feel that they are attached to that group and there's some belonging there. And then final growth was linking together Maslow's stages 4 and 5 of self-actualization and self-esteem. And this makes the employee productive. So when he feels that everything's in place, then he can, and he's being supported to grow, then he's going to feel that he's really in a good place and motivated to do a good job. Quite a simple theory, but if you hover over those wheels in that graphic, you can get more details. Right then, so let's look at McClelland's theory of needs, known as an acquired needs theory because he proposed that individuals' specific needs are acquired over time, and they're shaped by your experiences. Most of these needs can be classed as either, he talked about achievement, affiliation, and power, and we'll come back to that. But it's about knowing what the dominant motivator is, and we're all different in that situation. An example could be that an employee has done a fantastic piece of work. It's been lauded as something fantastic, and at a monthly staff meeting, for example, they're given say an Employee of the Month award, some sort of award, and they're invited to come out to the front to accept it. And straight away, you can see they're embarrassed, they're not happy, they're very, very unsure, and you might just think, oh, they're a bit embarrassed. But as soon as it's over, they leave, and they don't want to be involved in the celebration. Now, you might think you've done them a favour by putting them forward as Employee of the Month, etc. But for some people, that can be seen as the worst thing that could happen to them. They don't see it as a reward. And under McClelland's theory, you would have been better off giving that person praise in a one-to-one situation, because their main driver is affiliation. And they don't want to stand out in a crowd. They want to be part of the group, linked to the group. They favour the collaboration. They don't like being put in the limelight. So what he proposed is that there's three main dominant drivers. As I said, achievement, affiliation, and power. So achievement is all about having that strong goal orientation and wanting to accomplish challenges, taking calculated risks to meet those goals, liking getting feedback, but will quite happily work alone and will take the challenge on board. Affiliation is more about a driver of wanting to be part of a group, wanting to be in collaboration rather than competition, not liking taking risks, and just wanting to be liked and preferring to be in a group. And then the power one is about wanting control and wanting to influence others, liking winning debates and arguments, and enjoying competition and status and the recognition of being a winner. And dependent on which one of those is the sort of driving force behind us will depend on how we need to make sure we provide motivation for that person. So to do it, the key is that first we need to identify the dominant driver of our staff. For example, mine, and they can be two, because I would say mine is achievement, affiliation, and then it's setting tasks, objectives, rewards based on those, so that we're making sure that the right motivations are encouraged for the right staff. And as I said, not everyone's the same. So an interesting way of approaching things. Moving on, we look at Adams' equity theory. This theory advocates a fair balance, equal balance between the inputs of the employee and the outputs the employee receives, and you can see the things listed there. According to this theory, if we get that balance right, those two things added together will give us a contented, motivated employee. He linked together Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Hertzberg's 2 theory factor, and he built on those, acknowledging that there were subtle and variable factors that impact on an employee's perception of their relationship with their employer. So if they don't feel they're getting back what they're putting in, then they can become demotivated, and start to feel as if what they're doing is greater than what they're getting back. So it's about finding that balance. And although we're not in control of things such as the salary, perhaps, the benefits and the rewards and the terms and conditions, perhaps, we are, as leaders, totally in control, perhaps, of the intangibles such as recognition and appreciation. And we've talked about those a lot as we've gone through it. So that's Adams' equity theory. This one, Reese's 16 Basic Desires, is quite complex really to use, but it does wrap up all the others very nicely really, because he identified 16 fundamental needs, values, drives that he believes motivate a person. He did this while he was hospitalized during the 1990s, and he was watching observing the sort of devotion and the work and the effort that the nurses put into doing a really good job while they were caring for him. he thought they loved their work, and he began to sort of question them and talk to them about what it was. And afterwards, it involved 6,000 people that he questioned. He came up with 16 basic desires, and they were based around acceptance, curiosity, eating, family, honor, idealism, independence, order, physical activity, power, romance, saving, social contacts, social status, tranquility, vengeance, all those words that are in that sort of visual there. You'll have to research them a bit more, but it does draw together the fact that it's a very complex thing, and there are lots of factors that go into what motivates people to do what they do. And obviously we've just skimmed through these variety of recognized motivational theories, and you'll need to do a little bit more research on each of them, but they're all easy to find. They're all common ones, so you should better research those and then adapt what you believe will fit into the situation, the task, or the individuals that you're working with at the time. So we're going to look at coaching and coaching models and approaches now. And coaching can mean many different things to many different people, and we're not here to debate that. But coaching is an important skill for a leader. It's about coaching your people to achieve their best. If it's done well, this engages them, empowers them, helps them make better decisions, solve problems better, and develop themselves so that they can progress in their careers. Now, some organisations, and yours might be one, may already have a formal coaching training or approach, or have a system in place. However, many leaders just develop their own skills themselves, and sometimes they don't even realise they're doing coaching. As soon as someone talks about coaching, they get nervous and possibly stop doing what they're doing because they think they may get it wrong, they may not follow a recognised approach, and therefore they haven't got the confidence in it, feel they might make a mistake. So we will be going to look at some systems, and hopefully you can use these either to understand some proven techniques, practices, recognise them, or just to recognise and possibly improve what you're already doing so that you can start helping and developing your staff. Or maybe it'll be about introducing it to your organisation. So coaching models, they are simply a predetermined framework so that we can sort of plan and know what to expect. They can be useful to give us a structure or a focus, particularly when we're first starting out or we're trying to improve our coaching skills. As our experience and our confidence grows, the actual model or that structure becomes less and less a factor as each intervention with the individuals that we're coaching drives the sort of focus and structure, and it becomes their session and they're talking, they're thinking, and they're airing their thoughts as they should be. None of these models, I think, are better or worse, but some of them are just different and they're better in different situations. Really, it's just people giving their own spin on the approach, and we'll look briefly at some of these. You can then do a bit more research based on the ones that are being used within your organisation or you think would be more suited in the situations you're in. There is some handouts on them as well. So in the next couple of slides, we're just going to go through some recognised coaching models. So firstly, before we look at some of these recognised coaching models, let's just make sure we've got some basic agreement. We need to make sure we can distinguish between coaching and mentoring, so that whichever we use is the most appropriate for the workplace or the individuals. Mentoring is normally delivered internally. Coaching can be delivered by both internal and external staff to the organisation, and we'll see why in a minute. But for managers to use either of these effectively, there needs to be a clear distinction about what the role of a coach or a mentor is, because there are subtle differences that will make a massive difference to whether they're successful or not. So rather than going down a route of looking at definitions, we'll just look at some graphics, and we'll look at and focus on the style and focus that differs between coaching and mentoring. So in coaching, the focus is on a current situation or issue, a problem which has been identified in the performance, either by the management or the employee, and it's over a set time period because we're talking about when we're going to improve that performance by. So it's usually going to be linked to SMART objectives, and those are the sort of things that are needed in those time situations so people know when they're expecting to see changes. The style is around questioning and drawing out the opinions, the reasons, the actions, so the control remaining with the coachee and talking about just questioning them, getting them to realise themselves. It's about offering them feedback on those questions and on performance as it changes. And then it's about having a structured set sessions, probably in line with those SMART targets. So a set period where we know we're going to wait for and see improvements that we've agreed, and that it's in a structured set sessions. So we know when we're meeting with the people, we know what to expect. Whereas with mentoring, the focus is slightly different. It's about supporting a person's career or their role, and it's ongoing and it's on demand. So it's about that person requesting information from the mentor, coming to them looking for something. And the style, because they are normally mentors are senior or experts in the same field, so someone in your organization, they will share experiences with you about how they've done it and give you advice about how it happens within the organization. And they will, the sessions will be ad hoc to meet the mentee's demands. When the mentee comes up against something, they'll come to their mentor and ask for advice. They'll ask for a direction, etc. So a subtle difference, not only in the focus, because one's on a set thing, one's on career focused and general, and then the way the person goes about it in the style. One is about offering experience and advice because they're an expert. The other one is just about listening, giving feedback, and making sure that the coach, Chi, is still in control of the situation and solving the problem. So just to sort of sum up there then, mentoring is often going to happen when you've got new employees in a new role or a change or a promotion, because it's about the mentee seeking to develop themselves using the mentoring process on an ongoing process. As they improve, they'll seek advice and expertise from the mentor, and it could be about anything. So it's very broad based. It's a very natural relationship, often developing into a long-term relationship with meetings and discussions on an ad hoc basis, depending on when the mentee needs them. And at certain points it may tailor off, and at other points it may become more intense. Whereas coaching is about a particular area that has been highlighted for development, a problem or an issue with performance, sometimes highlighted by the employee, sometimes by the employer. It focuses on that issue. There'll be a time scale on it. It'll be about developing that person's performance, and usually won't include any personal development, whereas the mentoring might do, because if it's going to be personal development, not workplace, it's going to normally be a counselling matter and want to go to something a bit more personalised than the coaching that's in place. So really that's the difference between the two. So let's look at some recognised coaching models. The first we're going to look at is a simplistic model, the GROW model, developed in the 1980s by some business coaches. Its simple approach is sometimes compared to planning a journey, in that you would decide where you're going, the goal, establish where you are, the current reality, explore the possible routes, the options and the obstacles such as traffic jams, hold-ups, the bumps that could come along the road, and then finally you'd have your route and off you would go. Right then, so the first step is around establishing the goal. Look at the situations or behaviours that need to change so that we can structure this into a goal. Remember to use SMART, so specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound, and look at what they think it will look like, how it will be achieved, what they will judge as success criteria. And then think about, does it fit into the organisation's goals or team goals? The next bit is about examining current reality. They need to reflect on what the current situation is. This can be quite difficult, but if we haven't fully considered the starting point, we could be missing vital information that will stop us moving to the next step. Sometimes take some time to get through this and fully evaluate the current situation. Then we've got to look at exploring the options, and some of them may have emerged as we looked at what the current situation is, but we need to ensure that we determined at this stage all the possible options, not, oh, that couldn't happen, because they need to be considered at this stage, and then we can possibly, as the coach, offer some options as to why some of them might not happen, and then we could be looking at the obstacles that are in place. What could they be? What constraints could we remove that might make the situation happen? And then finally, it's about establishing the way forward, but really it's about establishing the will or their commitment, because we've got the idea, but we need to make sure they're fully committed to specific actions. And And then all that's needed at the end of that is to come up with a date when you will review the progress together. So quite a simplistic model, but gives you a structure to follow. So the next model we're going to look at is the STAR model. There are a number of versions of the STAR model around. It's rooted in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and such as that it's suited to problem solving, stress management. It's about changing the patterns of behavior and the thinking people have behind difficulties. So first stage is situation. That's identifying what the specific situation is that's creating the difficulty. The next is the task or thoughts, and that's what thoughts are going through the mind at the time and what do they think it is that's causing them the difficulty. The next part is actions. So how do they typically act in that situation? What is their response and their response to their feelings and their thoughts? For example, is that what's making it worse? And then the results are what the result is of those actions and thoughts in that situation and how they feel afterwards. So you can see from this one, it's definitely about casting a spotlight on how they feel and discovering what their own behaviors are, and it can be used to focus on irrational thoughts, overblown thoughts, thoughts about what other people are thinking about. In other words, groundless fears or worries, and start developing coping strategies to get through those so that you can change behavior when faced with a similar situation. Can be quite fast and effective way of looking at things, and if you hover over each of those sections to do with STAR, STAR, then you can have a look at a further description. And now we're going to take a look at the ARROW model. This is a lesser known model created by an Australian transformational coach. It's about the same as the others, about taking aim at the goal, looking at the current reality and reflecting on how we get there and what the actions are. But the keys were the aim. What does the client want? What do they want to happen in that situation? What is the current situation? What currently happens, for example, in the reality when those things occur? The reflection, and this is a key or pivotal stage in this process. This is where they need to reflect on what they've outlined, look at the first two stages and taken stock of what is required and how big the gap is. The next step is options. So as if we're starting to take aim, considering what we might have to do to hit our target, as it were, for the ARROW. And then the final one, way forward. This is now about committing to actions and carrying out those actions as planned to ensure that we hit the target. Very similar, just variations on the others, but the key point in this one, the difference in the wording, I presume, is that pivotal stage, which is the reflection, which is about taking stock of the first two stages and then moving on and clearly splitting it by that reflective section in the middle. Again, you can hover over the A, R, O and W and look at them in a bit more detail. So the next one we're looking at is the CIGAR model developed by the Full Potential Group. And as we can see from the stages, very similar to a lot of the other models, as I said, just a variation on it. The first one, the current reality, pretty self-explanatory. Where are you now? What is the situation? You know, what is your area of concern, or how do you feel about something? The ideal is a statement that will constitute a good outcome for the intervention in respect of what that current reality is. So where would you like to be? The gaps in this are referred to as airlocks. They're the things that stop things happening, so identifying the gaps that exist between the current situation and the ideal. The action is simply deciding to do something, and as we've said in a lot of the others, and it's more about establishing a commitment to undertake it. And then the review is probably, as in others, going to happen at the next session, because it's about reviewing what the outcomes were of those suitable actions and looking at that in terms of results. So that's the SIGAR model, again, very similar, and that's from the Full Potential group. So the final model we'll look at is the Oscar model. As I said at the beginning, there are lots of models out there, and I'm not saying that these 5 we've looked at are the best. They're just 5 that have been picked out. This is a solution-based model, so the theory being that you don't look at the problem, you look at the solutions that could be there. So instead of just discussing their causes and their difficulties, you look at what they can do about it. And it goes through 5 stages: outcome, scaling, know-how, affirm action, and review. And there are some subtle differences to this one. The outcome is similar to goals, obviously, and that's looking at, but they do say that the focus should be on differences that can be made, such as increased confidence, self-awareness, getting more respect, or things such as that. The scaling part is probably the biggest difference, because you're asking the person who's being coached to scale themselves from 0 to 10. So 10 being their perfect outcome and 0 being the complete opposite. And very rarely do people scale themselves at 0, which therefore gives you something to work with. The know-how bit is about know-how and resources, and establishing how far, using that scale, how far towards their outcome they are, and identifying what strengths and why they're not at 0 themselves. You can then use that to affirm an action. You can affirm the positive, reinforce the positive bits by reflecting back on what they've talked about, and try and draw out a confirmation of the actions moving forward to reinforce those. So if they're good at something, how they're going to use that more and do that more. The final stage is review, and that's self-explanatory again. And as we've said in others, probably happens at the beginning of the next stage, because it's about reviewing what they have been doing better, what they have improved. And it's about bringing all those together and trying to focus for this person on what they can build on in the strengths they already have. So a lot of those models we've looked at are really the same. There's just slight differences, slight variations that fit into different situations or into different organizations, or possibly to do with the individual personalities of the coach or the coachee. And on the next slide, we'll just recap where we got to with coaching models. So right then, we've reached the end of session 2, and really all the things we've looked at come down to trying to do one thing, which is key to a leader, and that's engaging our people so that we can work with them to improve their performance, because if they're not engaged, we've got no chance. As we went through it, we looked at the types of teams there are, and we focused on virtual and remote teams, and what's needed to be focused on to lead them effectively, because it's probably one of the most difficult things to do. We then looked at a range of motivational techniques. We looked at some recognized techniques, and you'll have to research those and think about how in the activities how they fitted into your organization. We then looked at 5 individual types of coaching models that can be used on staff in your organization, and in the next slide we'll look at what you need to do with that information for the assignment. Right then, so as you can see, there's 2 links there for you to follow. There's 2 videos that I'd like you to watch before the next session, and before you do your activity, because they'll give you some sort of additional information. So watch the Steve Jobs about how to manage people, and then there's a short presentation on employee engagement, which links together the culture and a lot of the things we've been talking about. Then complete activity 4. Activity 4 has got 2 parts. The first part is looking at motivational techniques and how you think they're used in your organization. So it's getting you to reflect on what you think is going on or where it could be improved. And the second part asks you to pick 2 coaching models Now, it can be from the 5 you've looked at, or it can be from others you've got, because there maybe already be something in place in your organisation, and look at the effect on your organisation and why or how you think they could be improved. Once they're complete and they've been uploaded, you can move on to session 3. Thank you.